When did Asian American films start making a splash in the US, and why is it still, has it not really made that much headway in the mainstream?
You have the Joy Luck Club, and you have the wedding banquets. And each time it promises the possibility that this is going to be the game changer, and it never really affects the mainstream in a significant way.
Now we have two Taiwanese filmmakers. Even its documentary, they're forever Oscar nominees. It is going to open doors. People will listen to that possibility. And I think it's very exciting times for the Taiwanese and Taiwanese American films.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. It is that time of year again when actors, directors, writers, producers, and other movie talent walk down the red carpet at the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood. On this year's Academy Awards or Oscar nominee list, you will find a number of creators with a strong Taiwan connection, and that includes two grandmas. Well, to discuss the Taiwan films at the Oscars and the Asian movie movement in Hollywood, we welcome scriptwriter and filmmaker who's based in Los Angeles, Weiko Lin, who's currently in Taipei with us at the moment, and Brian Hu, the director of the San Diego Asian Film Festival. He's also the area head of the School of Theater, Television and Film at San Diego State University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the program. I'm going to start with you, Weiko. There are two Taiwanese American short documentaries which are nominated at this year's Oscars. They're both in the same category. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's pretty incredible, and both of those filmmakers are Taiwanese Americans, right? Have a very kind of global structured way of telling a story, even the documentary form. And even the subject matter is very strongly thematically connected to their perspective as Taiwanese and Taiwanese diaspora. And having two in the same category, I think is phenomenal. Two very different looks at it, right? But all from a very personal perspective, right? Anchoring them in terms of the relation to an island, right? To Jingmen. And then the other one's about the grandmothers in the life of the filmmaker. So it's two very different documentaries, but yet strong, significant ties to the Taiwanese roots.
I want to bring it down to the narratives here. And Brian, the two films are personal stories, like Weiko said, closely tied to family history, and have a sense of that immigrant story that you often see in Asian American films. Why is it that's often what the kind of story that evolves during Asian American movies or documentaries?
I mean, I guess you could say that this is an experience that all Asian Americans have some connection with, right? Whether they are immigrants themselves, their parents, or maybe earlier generations. And so maybe at some point, if you are an Asian American filmmaker, that will be a narrative that you will turn to at some point. But I would also say that this is also the narrative of Asian America that the mainstream is very familiar with, and that is very palatable, very legible. When Hollywood, like Disney Plus, which has one of these films, the New York Times, which has another one of these films. When they commissioned them, when they distributed them, I think they understood that a mainstream audience would immediately recognize an Asian American story as an immigrant story. So those forces are coming together, and perhaps that's also contributing to why there's such successes right now.
So I'm going to get both of you to answer this question. What constitutes as an Asian American movie, film, or documentary to you, Weiko?
I think it's about the perspective. Right? I think it's perspective of the characters, and specifically, I feel the ones that really make it on the global stage, like these two documentaries, as well as, like going back to Ang Lee's films, right? Ang Lee films. I think it's very exciting that it's a very universal humanistic relations that these filmmakers are able to grasp, but yet very specific Taiwanese perspective. And that's what makes it Taiwanese, if you will, right? So it's not just like having an Asian character. You just kind of say, they're from Taiwan. It's not just by label, but in terms of the specific, intricate, subtle things that I think Taiwanese viewers will absolutely identify with, right? But there's that universality of human emotions that I think threaded through both films.
And if I broaden it out across the Asian American spectrum, particularly what we're seeing in Hollywood, Brian, what is that? What is it that defines it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that historically Asian American cinema has been significant because it carves out a space for films and filmmakers and stories that Hollywood has historically ignored and marginalized. This category exists just because filmmakers on the side are saying, hey, why are not our stories not important? Why aren't we supporting people who look like us? So it's coming together as collectives, forming our own film festivals. So you might say like these are films that are kind of by Asian Americans, about Asian Americans, and for Asian Americans. At least that's kind of historically how this category has emerged, really to fill in a need that the mainstream just seems to neglect.
Right. So we asked filmmaker Jay Chern to sit down with S. Leo Jiang, the director of the Oscar-nominated documentary Island in Between, and he discussed what compelled him to make a story about Taiwan after spending 3 decades away. Take a look.
All of my films up till now have not been about the Taiwanese community. I made films about the Vietnamese American community. I made films in China. I made a film in the Philippines. It's only these last few years that I feel like I need to focus my energy and invest my time more towards Taiwanese stories. Feels important right now, and maybe it's because of where I am in my life and how I ended up back in Taiwan after 30 plus years in the US that, I'm glad that I can contribute, use my experience, use my storytelling skills to tell Taiwanese stories. I feel like ultimately this is a film about identity, and this is a film about, finding a sense of belonging and how that evolves. And also about how the borders and the boundaries are not as black and white as a lot of people perceive it to be, especially outsiders who are not directly involved. People always think, oh, you're either on my side or your side, right? I mean, it's very simplistic, if you will. And I personally think that that's the root of a lot of problems in the world today. I do feel like my career, all my work has been about exploring people and the situation on the margins, and then present the complexity of it, that to show how, what the gray area feels like, to show how, the world is not that simple, that we all sort of struggle, and maybe the struggle is a positive thing because then we're less likely to have these knee-jerk reactions about good and evil and about, one side versus the other. So, I mean, I think ultimately I would love, people to continue to feel resonant, that this film resonate with their own personal story somehow. I mean, on the identity side, on the sense of belonging side, which you don't have to be Taiwanese, you don't have to know the situation here to understand that. I think we all, have this struggle no matter where you are.
To watch the full version of that video, please visit our YouTube page or the TaiwanPlus website. Weiko, Leo talks about finding identity and a sense of belonging through his work. As a screenwriter and someone in the movie business in the US, how much do you feel that you put that your Taiwanese self into your narrative, stories, and your work?
I always try to find some sort of element or angle. So 10 years ago, I actually came back to Taiwan and made a movie called 100 Days. And that was about 百日冲喜, which means basically if a parent passes away, they have 100 days to get married if they're not married in order for to bring luck and prosperity to the family. So in a way, I also brought along a Chinese American filmmaker who's been, Chiang, who's directed, 200 episodes of primetime television in Hollywood. He came back because he left and he was 18 years old from Hong Kong, but his family had lived in Taiwan. So how much of my work is in Hollywood? I think I've taken the experience of the Hollywood as a screenwriter, but brought it in to tell a full story, but in Taiwan. And we actually shot it on Manchu Islands, which is the other island in between Taiwan. And that was very meaningful. So in terms of how my work has infused, in terms of Taiwanese Americans specifically, not so much in Taiwanese American kind of experience, but I have brought in those kind of storytelling to films that's fully in Mandarin and fully shot in Taiwan.
And Brian, when we talk about the Oscars, how important is that for documentaries like the ones that have been nominated? And what do you hope that kind of recognition, even if it's not a win, will do for the Asian American film ecosystem?
Well, I mean, at least for these two filmmakers, for the rest of their lives, they can be called Oscar-nominated filmmakers. And I mean, taking that with you is going to help. It's going to open doors, right? It's to greenlight projects, to create connections. I mean, what an incredible network it is to be a part of the Academy. So if they succeed, I mean, in many ways, Asian American cinema succeeds too. And so, we should be very happy for them. But otherwise, I mean, like, winning Best Documentary Short historically doesn't like make you suddenly like the king of Hollywood or anything. Like, these two filmmakers are going to continue to hustle and to prove that these stories are important. So yeah, I mean, this is a time to celebrate, but it's only one step of many that they're going to have to climb, and Asian American cinema has to continue to climb.
Right. And sorry, did you want to jump in, Weiko?
No, I just think, Brian, you mentioned before, Asian Americans, making films for the Asian American community because that's an audience that wasn't served. But what's exciting about these two Oscar nominations, in some ways, it has indeed crossed over, right? So just from even last year's Everything Ever All at Once to these two Oscar nominees, even this documentary, because, Sean Wang is also a feature narrative filmmaker with a Sundance feature film, that debuted, that premiered this past edition. It's very exciting because I remember when Ang Lee kind of made its global breakthrough with his films, those Taiwanese films, there hasn't been that kind of excitement and energy since Ang Lee. Now we have two Taiwanese filmmakers, even this documentary, and again, like Brian mentioned, they're forever Oscar nominees. It is going to open doors. People will listen to that possibility. And I think it's very exciting times for the Taiwanese and Taiwanese American films.
And Weiko, as someone who has very close ties with the film industry here in Taiwan, you come here quite a lot and work a lot with a lot of the filmmakers. Do you think that will have some kind of a trickle-down effect to the film industry here?
Absolutely. I think it's slowly, there may be some embrace of the Taiwanese American filmmakers because not only, they're not making films that has nothing to do with Taiwan. Again, look, these two Oscar nominees is very much connected to Taiwan. So perhaps there could be more further partnerships between the Taiwanese filmmakers and the Taiwanese American filmmakers who has not the know-how, but just the experience of that global narrative structure that they've been used to working in the States, but now combined with the specific local stories and local perspectives of Taiwan. I just think there's going to be really exciting opportunities in the future, especially with the American streamers slowly doing more and more international local productions. I think Taiwan is really poised to be an exciting space to do those things.
All right, so we kind of look back at last year's Oscars, and as you both mentioned, that Everything, Everywhere, All at Once won several awards. Brian, what has that done for Asian American films and content?
Yes, Everything Everywhere All at Once had everybody talking, of course. Like it was a movie. I mean, in some sense, like whether it wins Oscars or not, it begs conversation because everyone's like, what was that movie? What was that about? I've had so many conversations with my parents, for instance, for whom like that movie doesn't really resonate, but they're so curious about like what is this new generation of Asian American cinema and why is it suddenly so renowned? And so yeah, I think if anything, that film has opened up a more conversation about what is Asian American cinema, who is it for, why it's valuable, and then of course, inevitably it's going to open doors in Hollywood, not just for like the standard immigrant story, in which in many ways it is, but also hopefully just for weird movies, right? That Asian American cinema doesn't have to just be these sort of solemn stories about intergenerational trauma and immigration, but it could just be kind of crazy sci-fi with endless style. I like that film sort of unlocks that possibility of many. I mean, that's the theme of the film, that there are so many versions of ourselves that we've yet to explore.
And, speaking of conversations, Weiko, how much conversation is there or how much distinction is there being given to Taiwanese film content or Taiwan filmmakers as opposed to Chinese filmmakers? Like, is that distinction being made at all in the conversations you're having or in the whole sphere of U.S. film?
Yeah, I don't think, at least from my experience, there isn't a distinction that, that's a mainland Chinese film versus a Taiwan film within the Asian American community. But I think what the story is, the set with a Taiwanese family, the set with a mainland Chinese family, even with the Hong Kong Chinese family. So I don't think it's labeled that upfront, but I do believe the distinction we talk about is about a Taiwanese family, but not necessarily like here's a Taiwan movie per se, right? So the whole Chinese diaspora, right? It's kind of the different pockets of it. Of course, you have the distinct perspectives because culturally, politically, socially, it's very distinct, but yet I don't think that's the forefront label, at least from my experience going through.
Okay, let's talk about exposure for Asian American films or even just Asian movies in the international film environment. Brian, you run the San Diego Asia Film Festival. It is the second largest such festival in North America, but still not mainstream. Now, firstly, when did Asian American films start making a splash in the US, and why is it still, has it not really made that much headway in the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, Asian American films have been around for decades. There are these sort of blips in its history. You have the Joy Luck Club, and you have the Wedding Banquet, and Better Luck Tomorrow. This is Justin Lin's breakthrough film in the early 2000s. And each time it promises the possibility that this is going to be the game changer, and it never really affects the mainstream in a significant way. I will say I've always been very jaded about like, is this film going to change the game? I have to admit, the last few years have felt different, and it's the right. I mean, films like The Farewell, Minari, Everything Ever All at Once. This year with Past Lives. That critics, like mainstream critics, are talking about it. Like my students are talking about these films, even when I don't ask them to. And I sort of attribute this to the fact that these films, weirdly enough, are all distributed by the same company. It's A24. They are an independent studio, but in Hollywood, but still considered one of the major Hollywood players. And I think they've just perfected the formula of which kinds of Asian American films to get behind. How do you do the PR around the film? How do you launch awards campaigns around them? And how do you make them cool? And somehow the traction built by these films and through this company has, I think it's actually made a difference in giving visibility and legibility to these movies.
Okay, I want to turn the conversation to more practical matters since you brought that up about the PR, the marketing, the funding. Filmmakers know that besides having an idea for a story and how to show it, it's also crucial to know where the money's coming from. The Oscar-nominated short documentary director S. Leo Chiang tells us how his film Island in Between was picked up by the New York Times.
The way that New York Times op docs work is they tend to partner with films through acquisition, right? They come in fairly late and they basically pick up the film and launch it. Had some feedback, we go back and forth for a couple months, and then they say, yeah, like we're gonna come on board. And actually, sort of from then on, the timeline went really fast. I mean, that happened in August, maybe. And then by end of September, we had qualified for the Academy Awards. By December, it was launched on their website, and then, on YouTube. And then, I mean, here we are. So, yeah, it's been really great. I sort of now love the short documentary form.
Weiko, Leo's documentary, as you mentioned, got picked up quite late by the New York Times in the production cycle, which meant that he probably had to fund a lot of it. How much of an issue is that for filmmakers, especially in the Asian film industry, trying to hit the international circuit? And also then, from there, I mean, he was fortunate that the New York Times picked up on it, because then that suddenly gives you the exposure. So it's not just the funding, then how do you get the exposure after? How much of a challenge is that, or is it getting easier for people in this part of the world, or be it Asian Americans, to get their work seen?
Oh, I think it's hard for that kind of, I don't know how he got the initial funding to make the documentary, but again, it's a short form, right? So it's shooting in Taiwan. I'm sure the crew cost is not as extensive as you would have to do it in the States, but I think definitely it's a challenge, going forward. But in terms of mainstream, like Brian mentioned, A24, those films, if there's a certain filmmaker that they really believe and trust in, and I feel like both of these filmmakers are going to have bright futures, not just in documentary, but in a scripted form, they're going to be able to unlock those studio backing.
I'm going to change tack a little bit here and talk about the way we watch movies for people on the other side of the screens. Brian, things have changed so much since the pandemic. Streaming has become the go-to pretty much. Is that the way things are going? And are theaters going to make a comeback? And should movie makers be focusing on making products for streaming?
Well, I think the smart thing to do for filmmakers is know who your audience is and know where your audience is. I mean, these two docs that are nominated for the Oscars, these two films are on streaming already, right? Like if you think YouTube is kind of streaming, and Disney Plus for Sean Wang's is on streaming. So, and they've been able to find audiences as a result. So as much as I'm nostalgic for the theatrical experience, and to me, there's nothing like it. I still wish I could watch every movie on the big screen, but I also know that I can't. I've got a kid at home. It's hard to leave home. And so which films am I going to choose to see on the big screen versus at home? And filmmakers will need to think about, all right, well, which kind of film am I making then? And distributors are also getting more and more savvy about that. So it's going to have to be, I think it's going to be both. We may just end up going to the theaters for the bigger films, the more noteworthy films, the ones that we feel like are worthy of a big screen experience. It doesn't have to be a big budget film, but just one that we know, like we want our senses to all be activated. So the big screen is probably the best way to do that. And that will never be replaced, I don't think.
I completely agree with what you say, but I don't know. I'm an optimist for the theatrical experience. I looked at Oppenheimer. Let's not even say Barbie, because Barbie seems like a big budget. Obviously both are big budgets. But Oppenheimer, which is really a docudrama, obviously done by Chris Nolan, it's his highest grossing film. And it's really, we only saw the explosion, and it was really a drama. But those performances on the big screen, it was incredible. Obviously, I know everything is dictating watching things at home, but then I feel there's so much content online that, in the streaming services, that the select and curated theatrical releases, it kind of helps the audience, like, hey, this is pretty good enough to be in the theater, so let's go watch those. Like, I watched Past Lives on the big screen. I enjoyed that. I don't want to watch on the small screen. I want to watch those emoting very personally. And I think, by the way, I think Taiwanese filmmakers do that very well. So I think we could do that in a kind of global narrative structure. I think that the future is bright for theatrical. But that's just my eternal optimist thinking.
Right. And Weiko, speaking of the future and the changing landscape, we had the writers, actors strike in Hollywood. What has that changed for the film industry?
I think it's fantastic. I think we made a lot of strides, right? I mean, having two major unions go on strike together, especially with the AI world, I think was a really, really big. I think changing. Well, here's what's going to happen. What's already happening, right? The streamers have already kind of condensed the number of content they are making, right? So that actually put a stop shortage, and they kind of had to reassess and reset and really think about what they're making and putting out there with their funding. But in terms of what the impact it has on the strike it has is to give better protection for these artists to make a full living. Because screenwriters, obviously got to a point where they're in a writer's room for a set number of just a few weeks. And once they're done, they don't really have a job, right, anymore. So they have to try to get staffing on several shows in order to make a full year's kind of living. But the strike had basically helped them get back to the old ways where they're guaranteed episodes where they're also producers on the set, on the shows that they're writing. So that means they're on set, so you're getting more financial compensation, but it's also to develop showrunners who can be future showrunners, right? And also for AI protection in terms of the studios can't just use AI to generate, here's a basic treatment, now we're gonna hire a writer to adapt this treatment, which is probably a big overhaul, but when the writer's hired to adapt the material, the fee is significantly less than if it's an original material, right? And the original material, they pretty much have to do the original material because the AI generated isn't going to be that original, if you will, because it's a derivative of everything that's out there coming together. So I think that was a major stride for the strike.
Right, and AI is here to stay and is likely to have a much larger role across industries and in the film industry. So Brian, I want to ask you, as teacher, as someone who's guiding the next generation of filmmakers, what is the conversation you're having with AI and how much of a part will it play?
Well, we definitely recognize that AI is going to be a part of the future. The question ultimately is, how do we create better filmmakers so that they can make better movies, right? We know AI can be a tool to help them do research, to brainstorm ideas. But what are the tools that you need as a filmmaker to be able to be creative, to prompt AI in a way that's going to create better stories? But this is sort of an existential question for us, right? Because what is it exactly that we're teaching students? And are we teaching them how to write, like literally type exterior and the setting and then to start a scene, or is what we're doing helping them kind of work with a kind of artificial intelligence buddy to create these kind of stories? I don't know. We are having these conversations all the time. We don't know the answer yet, but we do know that human touch, the organic human contribution to a film must never go away, and that we have to cultivate that skill first and foremost before we kind of unleash the possibilities of AI on these students.
You know, we're going to have to leave it there. I feel like that is an entirely other conversation and shows that we should be talking about and getting a discussion on. Unfortunately, my director, Katie, says it's a wrap. So thank you so much, Weiko Lin, Brian Hu, for being on the program. And to our audience at home, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can head over to our social media channels and leave us a comment there. Thank you for sticking around. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.